That is such a dumb thing to me, the idea that trade deficits are bad.
Hmm.
So Brandon, how do you know you're rich?
Yeah.
Is it because you can sell people a lot of stuff, or is it because you can buy a lot of stuff? Costs 75,000 jobs of downstream industries because again, it's a supply network. But the rest of the world isn't going to play the dumb game that Trump is doing.
We're pleased to welcome back to the channel Dale Rogers, author, economic PhD, and professor of business at WP Carey School of Business in Arizona State University. I want to start by saying thank you for taking the time to speak with us again today.
Nice to be with you.
Yeah, of course. The pleasure is always ours. I want to start with a few questions just about tariffs in general, and then maybe segue it into the tariff or trade war we're kind of seeing under Trump. Could you just kind of detail for the viewers what effect a tariff has on a business, and then specifically for them listening, like when we place a tariff on another country, how does that affect our business and supply chains and such?
Tariffs are basically a tax on imported goods. You can do an export tariff as well, but usually they're designed to protect the domestic industry. So a tariff is a tax that goes to the government on whatever goods are being imported. In addition to being a professor at Arizona State, I'm the director of global projects for ELOSH, Instituto Logistico Supply Chain in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. If you look at Brazil, do they have a really strong middle class like we've had? No. They have very rich people and they have very poor people, and they have incredibly high tariffs.
Mhm.
So, so like computers have been relatively cheap here. They're going to be a lot more expensive under the Trump administration because we're not going to make computers here. We might end up assembling some, but still, we got to get the parts from
Yeah.
somewhere else. One of the things I did with the Brazilians, I would bring them. I after 25 years, I stopped doing it, and I got my July back actually this year. It was great. But every July, sometimes August, but usually July, we get a bunch of Brazilian executives and we bring them to the US. And we start out in Reno, where I used to live, and then end up in Silicon Valley. And one of the places we would go every year was Microsoft. And they have all their licensing in Reno. And and they were so proud of the fact that they had a relationship with a Brazilian computer company. And so they were presenting to the executives I brought with me, and we went over to visit, and they had this big presentation. And the executives that were with me wanted the presentations over because none of them would allow their companies to buy this local Brazilian computer because it wasn't as good. But it was made domestically. It was designed and made domestically. And the good computers were the Dells and the Apples and the Lenovo's and the HPs. And those were not manufactured locally and certainly not from local components.
Just when we see tariffs typically be put in place, what and like obviously the companies are paying this tax that increases their costs. Do they typically pass that down to consumers? Are there layoffs to kind of make up for it? Like, what is the picture of the effects or the response from businesses?
Well, there's a couple of things. It's not just the tariffs, but it's the uncertainty around the tariffs. But if you look overall, I mean, Americans are richer than they've ever been. But if you look overall, and if you look around the world's better than it's ever been, and it's because of trade. And the other thing, because of open free trade, you tend to not have so many wars because if you're trading with someone, it's less likely you're shooting at them.
I do want to ask because you brought up with jobs and stuff. What do you think, like in the long run? Because you hear a lot of like Trump voters, supporters of the tariffs, talk about how, well, it's going to bring back American manufacturing. Trump will say, short-term pain and then long-term gain, because eventually the factories will move back to America. It's always been my understanding that more so like driving investment towards infrastructure, maybe like tax incentives to like build infrastructure, something like that. Like we saw under Biden, where we saw like manufacturing jobs kind of boom, that drives more manufacturing jobs. So I'm curious, like, if in the long run, do you think there is any incentives for factories to move here, or do you think it dissuades them more because of the uncertainty around things like imports?
I think that I think there is incentive, and you are seeing people move factories back. But the thing is that supply chains are so multi-tiered. With the 2018 tariffs, we were trying to protect our steel and aluminum industry. So basically, we saved about 1,000 jobs in in the steel industry by putting tariffs on the 2018 tariffs, which were not as big or as egregious as what these tariffs have been this year. And it probably costs 75,000 jobs of downstream industries because again, it's a supply network. So both you have these multi-tentacles going upstream back towards, where it's dirt and water kind of, and then downstream where it gets to the consumer. And the impact of making one of the inputs much more expensive tends to kill off um, players both upstream and downstream. And I have really thought that the last few administrations, um, but definitely Trump and 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 barely Biden understood supply chain, supply networks. I just think they didn't understand it.
The last thing I wanted to ask you was on trade deficits, because Trump often cites, trade deficits being unfair as the reason why he's putting these tariffs into place. Could you, like, are deficits inherently unfair? Or do we have ones that are unfair? Could you kind of walk us through that?
That is such a dumb thing to me, the idea that trade deficits are bad.
Hmm.
So Brandon, how do you know you're rich?
Yeah.
Is it because you can sell people a lot of stuff, or is it because you can buy a lot of stuff? I mean, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I understand that if you're a seller, you want to be able to sell, but truthfully, what we want is for our consumers to be able to access a global market.
Hmm.
And little things like closing the de minimis loophole, which was any shipment coming into the US under $800 that, there was no tariffs on. And I mean, we were seeing increased competition. Temu and Shine and those Chinese companies, which sells a lot of junk, truthfully, but also some good stuff, I guess. Um, those were putting pressure on domestic retailers, and it was likely to make those domestic retailers either better or they were going to die. If you look at retailing, who were the great retailers of the 20th century? Biggest ones were like Sears and Penny's and Kmart, and their models don't work today. And it's okay to let them get old and die, I think. I think that you want to have continuous innovation, and protecting old stuff is unhealthy in most cases. I think, I mean, I suppose there's certain exceptions for defense industry and so on. We got to be able to make stuff so we can protect ourselves. But for the most part, I think you let inefficient, ineffective um, companies die and be replaced by more effective ones.
I,
you
I
know.
am I am curious, one quick follow-up. What do you think this does to us like on a global market? Would this hurt our competitiveness if we're hindering our innovation like this and such?
Absolutely it does. It absolutely, yeah. And that's actually happening quickly.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And and we can't just depend on ourselves for innovation. Like, what's the most important product in the world? I suppose you could say food, but I'm going to say it's semiconductors,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
And where are the best machines made right now to fabricate semiconductors? Well, it's a company called ASML that was sort of a spin-off of Philips Electronics, which is in Eindhoven, Netherlands. And it's Dutch and it's not made here. And what's the biggest semiconductor company? Well, it's TSMC, and they've moved here to Phoenix, where I am. But they're based in Taiwan. And so I just think that uh, that closing the curtain, it's impossible anyways. But the rest of the world isn't going to play the dumb game that Trump is doing.